So welcome everyone. My name is Roland Bleiker. I would like to welcome you to this visual politics event with two fantastic guests, with Dr. Lesley Pruitt and Dr. Erica Rose Jeffrey, who will talk about their new COVID book, Dancing Through Dissonance, Creative Moment in Peacebuilding. And I would like to welcome you also on behalf of my co-host, Dr. Shreya Singh, who has been with us for quite a long time, has hosted several of these events. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Roland.
Thanks, Roland.
Joining from different parts of the world, especially in this virtual, physical, and hybrid space, and especially with me being a visitor on this land of the Turrbal, Yugara, Jagara, Yugarapul, and the Kwandamuka peoples, I do want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all First Nations communities across the spaces we meet. Indigenous sovereignty over many of these lands has never been ceded, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have been resisting, refusing, and disrupting colonialism since 1788.
Look, it's a particular pleasure to have Lesley and Erica Rose with us, and they're two of the most creative and most amazing and innovative scholars I know. They have both done fantastic work. Both did their masters with us quite a long time ago and have then gone on to much bigger and better things. Both did their PhD doing very, very unusual creative work. Erica Rose on the role of dance in peacebuilding, and Lesley on the role of music and youth in peacebuilding, all sort of really being at the cutting edge of peace studies and of international relations. So it's an absolute pleasure to have them here today. Erica Rose is currently directing a peace institute that does really fantastic applied work, including conflict resolution practices in Bougainville. She's also probably the world-leading expert on the use of dance in the context of Parkinson's disease. Lesley is senior lecturer at the University of Melbourne in development. And again, she is an exceptionally prolific author. She writes books like many people write articles, and prominent and influential books. She is probably the key authority on youth and peace building, but on a range of other factors as well. She has a fantastic article on the role of video in researching international relations. But I don't want to go on. I want the time to be devoted to Lesley and Erica Rose. I just want to say we're here to discuss about their new book on the role of dance in peace building called Dancing Through Dissonance, a Creative Moment in Peacebuilding. So I'll hand over to Shreya to start the conversation.
Thank you, Erica, Rose, and Lesley. I have enjoyed reading the book and going through it, and even chatting with you earlier about the book. And what came across to me was that this book really explores, the physical movement and how it can be a transformative social movement. And I'm picking this up verbatim from the book. And there has been a lot of extensive research done, particularly on theater as a tool for peace building. So I'm very curious to know what drew you to dance as a medium and as a form particularly. Was it the involvement of the youth, because Lesley works on youth, or was it the dance, or was it the physical freedom that's really felt through dance? So as an opening question, I want to explore about why particularly dance as a mode.
Thanks so much, Shreya, and thank you, Roland. And we're so pleased to be here to be able to talk about our research and our ideas. I'll start out with this one. And for me, I have a lifelong passion for dance. I had a professional dance career. I continued to connect with dance with communities. And so I was really interested in this ongoing research around how do we talk about dance? How does dance connect to the peace building work that I'm engaged in? And for me, it's this very iterative process. Because dance happens in the body, how we write about it and reflect about it is sort of an ongoing challenge and something that I'm quite interested in. There has been a lot of work done in theater and peace building, which is fantastic. I'm interested in also that embodied knowledge and the way in which dance is often used as a metaphor within politics, within conflict resolution. You can look at headlines which say things like the Pacific's delicate dance with China is fraught with danger. Australia must reclaim the floor. So these kinds of ways in which dance, the metaphor of dance, is used in complex conflict situations. in thinking about, for me, some of the things that the young people talk about in the practice and the research, other research that we've been involved in, is this idea of it being a nonviolent way to communicate, a way to connect with feelings. That for many people, it can be culturally relevant in terms of bringing out that local identity, that it can be relatively easy to access at a community level, and that it really connects into sort of self-expression and reduction of stress. So I think this is an important reason why young people in dance came together in this particular project. I also think that there is this both a freedom that comes from dance, but also a power that comes from dancing together. So that idea of synchronized movements can create powerful feelings of unity. And these are often used to focus feelings for group solidarity, like a cultural dance done for a celebration. Now, this can be both positively used and negatively in different contexts. But I might pass over to Lesley at this point.
Thanks, Erica Rose. Thanks again, Roland and Shreya. I think Erica Rose, our beloved professional dancer and dance scholar, has already so well and articulately covered many of the things. Personally, myself as a young person, I always loved dance from the youngest age as an over-enthusiastic amateur, far from a professional. But I guess in that case, I can be the example when people ask, oh, what about everybody else? I think we can all have a go and have a lot of fun. And I've found that over the years in numerous different research contexts. So might be seen as a natural extension of the research I did in my PhD, which was titled as focusing on music and peace building, but those programs that I looked at actually incorporated numerous dance elements. And it was very interesting and important, the learning that happened with the young people in those contexts. And I think on a level of personal bodily experience and tying that to scholarship, I really love how Beausoleil talks about dance as a practice of freedom. And I agree with that. I felt that, and also as a practice with capacity, like Erica Rose said, to bring people together, but also to engage in resistance, in resilience, in release. And so I just was so excited to get into this project, and I'm excited to keep thinking about this project going forward.
Great. So look, I was wondering, before we get into the substance of your book, if you could talk a little bit about the whole process of writing, how we actually embarked on your collaboration, in the sense that in our field, in politics, international relations, peace studies, it's still quite unusual for authors to co-write a book. You know, most of the books you see are single-authored, or they're edited book with an editor and various contributions, but to actually, for people to co-write an entire book is unusual, as opposed to different disciplines where collaboration is much more the norm. So how did you kind of encounter that? You know, how did you kind of meet, but also how did the writing process go? Did some of you write certain parts? Did you kind of flick the text back and forth? How did that whole process go, and how did you experience it?
It might be a bit of drawing on my dance background, but to me, that collaborative process is really exciting and is part of that ongoing reflective practice. And so when I was introduced to Lesley, several people kept saying, oh, you have to meet Lesley Pruitt. And so when I finally had the chance to meet her, I really felt like I met a kindred spirit in terms of someone who was equally enthusiastic about exploring these kinds of ideas, and also digging deeper into how do we connect them to theory? How do we look at existing sort of political systems, and how do we link in these embodied, felt, creative practices? So for me, that ability to engage in that dialogue back and forth, that exchange of texts, for me also is a real representation of that ongoing creative practice of peace. So that's something that I found really important to also represent in what we do. And for us, I think it's an ongoing dialogue, which is exciting, that we get to sort of exchange ideas, challenge ideas, provide other resources coming from, slightly different perspectives.
Thanks, Erica Rose. I can really agree with all of that. It was so exciting when we met each other, and I think we worked worked out that it was about 10 years ago. And so we've started those conversations that we're still having up until now. So going into this project, first I was following my PhD and I had this idea of the topic for my postdoc. And up until that point, I had mostly, if not totally done, as Roland said, as is typical in our field, sole authored work. And originally I thought this project would be a sole authored project. And then I was doing the case studies for the project in the US and Colombia, and I had asked Erica Rose to come on as a research assistant. And then I thought, this is crazy. This is really underutilizing like a brilliant mind and resource. Let me just ask Erica Rose, would she be interested to actually come together and collaborate to write this book? So that's how we've become sort of a long-term dance partners in the act of writing as we've been working on. And we're still getting excited about new ways to think about this and work on this together. And it's been such a joy getting to learn together and write together with her.
For sure, collaborations with peers and people it's just an exciting way to think about work, or just like a new idea and a new brain to bounce ideas off. And I think this book is testament to how well the collaboration really worked. I'm quite excited to read on also. In terms of another question, so Erica Rose, you mentioned that dance and peace building are not really that far-fetched. You mentioned examples of, like how in politics, it's quite a commonly used allegory or metaphor of the dance floor, taking the floor, doing a tango and things like that. But usually most people associate dance not with politics, but with leisure and fun. So can you specifically explain what role dance can play in peace building, particularly as a tool?
Yeah, I might have Lesley start on this one and then I'll add in.
Well, thanks, Erica Rose. Well, I think we can say no wonder dance has been marginalized in mainstream political thinking. I think partly that's because it resists the tendency of those more easily quantifiable technocratic approaches. But I think the two of us would agree that it's partly this kind of intangibility, if you want to call it that, this being always in flux, that provides a useful counterpoint from the use of dance. It's about creating and working with productive tensions while still keeping with the time and being ready for the next steps. Traditionally, standard approaches from the United Nations and other formal political organizations that participate in peace building have tended to render dance, along with other arts-based practices, activities of everyday politics, everyday life practices, as invisible. They've dismissed arts or dance-based practices as being soft or not serious, as you said. But I say, this question of, is it fun? Is it leisure? Can it really be serious? I say, yes, let's have fun. And let's follow Cynthia Enlow's call to ask what gets taken seriously when it comes to global politics, because that's part of what global politics is. And if we're thinking about what's being taken seriously and not, in our research, we really consider peace as socially constructed. So in line with scholars like Joanne Wallace, we agree that recognizing that helps us to see the need to uncover and transform hierarchies around who is seen as a legitimate holder of knowledge when it comes to understanding and creating peace. Tying in with that, I've been really inspired by scholars who engage with explorations of aesthetics and politics, most notably being very thankful for years of long-suffering and generous mentorship from Roland. And he and colleagues who've made groundbreaking contributions that have pushed those of us who've come after to use all of our available senses, to engage in all available creative sources, to consider complex political challenges. In terms of policy and practice, in recent years, we've seen the adoption and advancement of commitments to sustainable, inclusive peace and associated agendas at the UN, like the Youth Peace and Security Agenda and the Women Peace and Security Agenda. So we might expect to see some potential for opening up more thinking space there, but there's still a long way to go and a lot to learn. And I think as scholars, one thing that we've learned from the participants in our research is that to do that, then we need to accept their invite to take this positive risk. I have the book here. I wanted to share a little quote on that, which I keep reflecting back to challenge myself from some of the young research participants. This young woman was a facilitator for creative movement and peace building. And she talked about stepping outside your comfort zone. She said, when one person takes a positive risk, it shows the rest of us that we can take a positive risk and encourages us to do that also. So hopefully after a while, they will be able to see that if they can just do one thing that makes them uncomfortable or kind of step outside their comfort zone, that it actually helps other people to do the same and get the most out of the experience. So this kind of willingness to be vulnerable and take a risk is just one of many capacities that dancers embody that can contribute to peace. And I think Erica Rose can speak to those much more.
Yeah, thanks, Lesley. Yeah, that idea of risk-taking. When there are these calls for sort of creativity or imagination within peace building, one of the things that we've reflected upon is that there are very few opportunities to actually practice that, or to practice this idea of risk-taking, of trying to see things from different perspectives, from that idea of building empathy. And so in thinking about what we're examining, and this idea of an aesthetic, embodied medium that supports the idea of embracing emotions, of supporting relationships across difference, of supplementing and sustaining verbal forms of dialogue, and to bridge understandings of the local and global. This is one other way, as part of our human experience, to engage in that, in the sort of international peace building sort of scope, the context. So I think, just sort of adding to what Lesley said, one of the things that we were sort of looking at or drilling down at the start was also this idea of where does dance, where is it already happening? And what are the ways in which people are using dance? And so we developed a typology building on the work of others, and then really looking at the ideas of, while they overlap and it's fluid, because dance itself can be very fluid, that there are these different categories. So where it's happening in therapeutic uses, perhaps around sort of trauma, where artists are leading social change, where communities are leading social change through dance, where there's collective forms of people coming together, where dance is used as a way to educate communities. And this is often a space where also theater is often used in the peace building context. And then the idea of diplomatic exchange, that idea of that cultural diplomacy, and how that's a way in which dance has been used historically. And so then pulling that apart and looking at it at more of a practical level. And so I think one of the things, just sort of building that idea of that ability to see things, to practice things on the personal level. I'll just add a quote from one of the other facilitators, or one of the other participants. And she was saying that she learned a lot of new things, and that how the dance exchange, which was an activity they did together, is proof of the fact that we all define dance differently, and what can be symbolic movement to one person is different in each context. So for me, this is really about giving those opportunities, the way in which people are able to, in person, in their bodies, in a group, experience that actual idea of seeing a different perspective, of building that understanding from sort of different views.
Yeah, to me, this is precisely why I find your work so fascinating and so important, in the sense that most conflicts can't be solved by the kind of conventional ways we understand conflict, because often these conventional ways are actually part of why conflict occurs. So if you want to kind of look for solutions to entrenched conflicts, we have to look outside the norm, outside the conventional patterns. We have to look at things that are initially dismissed, like dance or music or art, and because that's often there where people can start to reconnect, can start to reimagine their communities. And that's why I think your work is so important. And I want to sort of maybe explore one aspect of your work that's more conceptual, and to me it's also sort of very much at the cutting edge where things are at the moment, and that is the notion sort of of bodies and embodiment, in the sense that most conventional analysis of peace or of international relations are very much sort of high politics analysis. They focus on institutions, on big actors, on states, on diplomats, but they don't focus on everyday people, and that they don't focus on embodiment. And a lot of the current literature that's really at the cutting edge deals with questions of embodiment, with affect, and how affective forces that are in bodies actually are a crucial part of how we interact in a conflict setting and in a peace setting. So can you say a bit more of how you dealt with that issue, in the sense that there are some real challenges, in the sense that embodiment is obviously has to do with our bodies, with how we feel, with our emotions, with affect. But as scholars, you are kind of writing about that. So you have to translate embodiment, you have to translate feelings and affect into words, and something gets lost in that process by definition. But how you grapple with that in terms of how are bodies central, and how do you write about bodies in a way that you did?
Thanks, Roland. That's definitely an ongoing challenge that we face. We actually start talking about that at the very beginning of the book, and there is inevitably something lost in trying to translate those things to the page, but we accept the challenge to keep working on that and doing it the best that we can. We do talk in one of our chapters about the prospects for dance and self-care for peace builders, and whether we'd apply that in that context. I'd say that, like, Erica Rose and I both engage in some of these practices ourselves in our lives in different ways, and connecting in that. And I often find some of the best ideas that I get, if I can claim I get any good ones for scholarship, I get when I'm moving. I don't get ideas sitting at the computer, sitting still. That's just a sort of personal note. But in terms of the scholarly setting, I think we can agree that ignoring bodies would leave us with limited and partial understandings of how people experience conflict and how we can find paths to peace building. So we'd align with a range of scholars who've done important work in this area. We refer often in our work to Lauren Wilcox's work, outlining bodies as being produced, productive, and political, and therefore crucial to understanding violence. Likewise, Helen Behrens has talked about embodied everyday peace. And Emma Hutchinson and our own dear Roland Bleiker have done such important work highlighting how emotions matter to global politics, and also matter to understanding and addressing conflicts and challenges. And we found that in these really practical ways in our research with these young peace builders. So our research participants highlighted dance's connection with bodies and emotions as central to its peace building potential. So I'd say we're making a case for, dare I say, inviting emotions into peace building without sidelining faculties of critical reasoning. This isn't an either or approach, it's a both and approach. We don't see emotions and reasoning as dichotomous. We take them as interrelated, and we believe both are necessary for pursuing social justice, which we see as a key element of positive peace. I have a couple of quotes here, again, from some of the participants that I really loved how they explained it. So one young man who participated in Colombia said, "The body is actually used as a stage for transformation." I thought this was really beautiful. And there was another young woman who worked in the program who said, "I think that our society at large really doesn't acknowledge the amount of knowledge that can be shared and communicated and learned through physicalizing things. We're not just heads. We focus so much on what goes on in our heads, but sometimes words are difficult, and moving brings people to an equal level and can unite people and build community in a much more organic and much more quick way than talking out loud." So bringing those ideas together, we've argued that dance can be an effective and an inclusive way to engage people in peace building, and particularly at times for supporting youth participation, but it also needs to be reflexive, critically engaged, and tailored to the situation at hand. So it may need to be age specific, gender sensitive, culturally relevant. In any case, it overall, as is the nature of dance, needs to be flexible to accommodate the particular needs of the localized setting and the actors involved.
I might just add to that. Thanks, Lesley. So just from my own personal experience as a dancer, there's so many moments I think, in my peace building work, which have been enhanced by my experience of sharing dance or having my own kind of dance exchange with others. And this in many ways creates an opportunity to have some of the more difficult conversations or to start to build those relationships to work towards conflict transformation in many ways. So what we saw in the research that we did was looking at some of the particular activities, one which was a mirroring activity. So the idea is, people are in pairs and they're following the movement of one person to the best of their ability, whatever that might be. And it's a very focused activity. This is something that's used not just in dance and creative movement, but in theater. It's also used sort of referenced in some peace building educational materials as a kind of an icebreaker. But this idea of sort of building that nonverbal narrative exchange, you're learning more about the other person, you're learning about yourself in relation to them. And this has been connected in what we were looking at to the practice of cultivating empathy, which has been identified as one of the crucial elements for building peace. And the idea of it being important for the restructuring of relationships after violence. And so one of the things that we saw is this idea of, again, the kinesthetic act of practicing, of building this kind of interpersonal exchange. And that you can have this sense of felt empathy, and which it provides avenues in which to see and understand each other's across difference. So this is one of the things where we saw it activating in practice by the young people that we were working with, but also something that I feel very keenly in my work, whether it's been some of the more recent work that we've been doing I've been engaged in Bougainville, in Papua New Guinea, and how even working with people who might be defined as sort of hardened ex-combatants, that this kind of moment of dance exchange opened up more possibilities for peace building.
Thank you, Erica, Rose, and Lesley. And I had so many questions, and a lot of them were answered in the process while you talked about the empathetic nature of dance and how it can help in peace building as a proven, and how inclusive it is in terms of abilities and gender and age and all of that. For me, one of my final questions I want to ask you is, how did this research particularly help see things that you either hadn't accounted for, or things you didn't see before, or also change the way you saw things or how you felt about things? Because you talked about dance being so physical and it's so embodied, of course, that writing about it a lot gets lost. So what was the things that you thought before and sort of changed in the process of doing this work particularly?
Yeah, maybe I'll start on this one. So just to give a little bit more context. So there were three main research sites that we were looking at in terms of Mindanao in the Philippines, Colombia, and the US. And so working with young people who are engaged in a dance-focused peace building program that was led and created by young people. So it was really all sort of immersed in that idea of being led by young people, being facilitated by young people. And so one of the things that for us was really interesting was this idea of scale and sort of a spectrum. So many of the participants talked about how they tend to envision peace as occurring on a spectrum, crossing a number of scales. So the idea of it originating within the self, or peace within the individual, and then expanding out to the local community, and then more broadly to create and sustain global communities committed to peace. So some of the ideas that may be taken for granted, like scaling being inherently good or valuable, were also something that the young people in the program critically reflected on. So they talked about the concept of scale in terms of making something available to more people in more places. So many times this was situated as a positive thing. But at the same time, many people pointed to a number of ways in which scaling might be limited or even limiting or even counterproductive, in that it could conflict with the idea of localization efforts. For example, they pointed to the problems with really short-term or project-focused approaches. The related funding limitations or the focus on measurable outcomes and how that could be challenging, and how so the scaling might sort of detract from other important issues. And I think one of the things that this also sort of focused on was, how in each particular local context, the young people really took on the project or the program in their own way and had their own voices, started to sort of be heard, be more vocal from that. So just one of the quotes from one of the participants in Colombia said, "It's like I have to Colombianize or Latin Americanize this program." The program was originally developed in the US. So anytime I have to Colombianize, it's like I'm putting part of myself in the program, and the program is getting all of this Colombian structure and Latin American structure. So really identifying how they were making it work from their own perspective, but also what that was sort of taking or their contribution to that within the bigger picture.
Thanks, Erica Rose. I think you've covered so many great points there. I thought, I might just share a couple of quotes as well from the young people. So one thing that stood out to us, as Erica Rose said, this notion of like peace starting within the individual, going out to the local community and expanding in terms of global movements committed to peace. That was interestingly something that was actually really shared across the sites. And I think the sort of individual aspect of it in a way was something that I didn't think about as deeply before we started doing this work. And it sort of makes sense when you're looking at embodied practices that you would start to understand that a lot more. But I thought I'd just share a quote from maybe each of the sites for you. So one young person from the Philippines said, "Peace means there's no violence, and it means peace within me." A young person from Colombia said, "Peace, I think, is a state that we should first search for inside in order to make it transmittable, to share and reproduce it in the community." And then finally, a young person from the US said, "I feel that can ripple throughout society." So you start with the inner peace at the individual, and then you find interpersonal peace. And that's kind of like the idea of peace that I have in terms of for myself and then for a larger community and ultimately the world. And we look at those that really tied in with things we learned from the young people about how peace builders practice self-care and the kind of practices that they engaged in and found the sort of capacity and support to go on with practicing in challenging situations in order to advance peace. And finally, likewise, Erica Rose showed some really important points on how we had to reflect on these ideas about scale in a way that I don't think we had really done so much before, and how we have this sort of tendency to think of scale of inherently a good thing, and how young people really brought that into critique. And so I just wanted to finish off the response to that question on sharing a quote from one of the young people who I thought put it really well. She said, "I think anytime you scale an idea, there's a danger of heading in a direction where you advertise to people, you need this program because," and it's really thinking about not, oh, we need X number of partners, or we need to show that we've scaled this much this year. It's really making it about the needs and having it to be something that's called for in the community. And that can be a huge problem in a lot of fields with international engagement, where organizations replicate this asymmetry of power.
So look, we could go on for much longer, and Shreya and I have another dozen or so questions that we could and would like to pose, but that might be the moment for Shreya and I and everyone else present to thank Lesley and Erica Rose for their absolutely fantastic new book, Dancing Through Dissonance. It's that to me, they are two of the most creative scholars we have in the areas of peace studies and international relations, and to see their book out together is an absolute privilege and pleasure for all of us, and I hope many of you will go and read it. So thank you very much, Lesley. Thank you, Erica Rose, for joining us, and it's been an absolute pleasure.